Story 1. The Shadow at the Alley. The neon glow of the Starlight Bowling Alley flickered against the inky night sky, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked pavement of the parking lot. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 1980s. Greasy pizza, sticky floors, and the rhythmic clatter of pins echoing through the cavernous space. For 13-year-old Ethan and his ragtag crew, Jacob, Josh, and Mikey, it was a sanctuary, a weekend escape from the monotony of suburban life in their small New Jersey town. Back then, in the early 2000s, a few bucks could buy you a couple of games and a soda, making it the perfect haunt for kids with empty pockets and restless spirits. Ethan remembered those nights vividly. The laughter, the friendly competitions, the way the air smelled of shoe polish and cheap beer from the adult side of the alley. The group would pile into a lane, their sneakers squeaking on the polished wood, trading jabs and cheering each other on. But there was always something slightly off about Starlight, a faint undercurrent of unease that lingered beneath the fluorescent lights. Maybe it was the way the older regulars stared a little too long, or the eerie quiet that settled over the place when the jukebox paused between songs. Ethan never paid it much mind until the night that changed everything. It started innocently enough. The boys were deep into their second game, the scoreboard a chaotic mix of strikes and gutter balls, when Ethan noticed him again. The man they dubbed Creeper Bob. He was a fixture at Starlight, a lanky figure with sunken cheeks and a greasy baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He'd always be there, alone, bowling on the adult side where the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the clink of beer bottles. What set him apart wasn't his solitude, but his strange ritual. Every so often, he'd wander the length of the alley, his eyes scanning each lane like a predator, sizing up its prey. The boys had laughed it off, slapping a nickname on him to mask their unease, but there was something about his gaze that made Ethan's skin crawl. That night, Bob was different, bolder. When a lane opened up next to the boys, he materialized out of nowhere, his bowling bag slung over one shoulder like a hunter's rifle. He set up his game with deliberate slowness, his movements mechanical, almost rehearsed. Ethan tried to focus on his throw, but Bob's presence was a weight pressing against his back. Then came the comments, small at first, innocuous. "Nice form, kid," Bob muttered as Ethan lined up a shot, his voice low and gravelly. "You gotta twist your wrist more." The boys exchanged glances, their laughter faltering. Jacob, always the boldest, shot back, "We're good, man." But Bob didn't flinch. He just smiled, a thin, crooked thing that didn't reach his eyes. As the night wore on, Bob's intrusions grew more brazen. He'd lean over the divider between lanes, offering unsolicited advice, his breath sour with beer. He'd interrupt their conversations with bizarre anecdotes, how he'd been coming to Starlight for decades, how he knew every crack in the lanes, how he could teach them a thing or two. The boys tried to ignore him, but the atmosphere had shifted. The alley felt smaller, the lights harsher, the music distorted. Then came the moment that shattered any pretense of normalcy. Bob stepped into their lane as Ethan prepared to bowl, his calloused hand closing around Ethan's wrist. "Like this," he said, his grip firm, his voice dripping with false warmth. Ethan froze, his heart pounding as Bob maneuvered his arm into a better position. The touch lingered too long, the man's fingers cold and unyielding. Ethan yanked his arm free, his face burning with a mix of fear and disgust. "We're done here," Josh whispered, his voice tight. The boys didn't need to be told twice. They abandoned their game, pooling their remaining cash to grab pizza at a joint a few blocks away. The walk to the pizza place was tense, the boys casting nervous glances over their shoulders, half expecting Bob to materialize behind them. They ate in near silence, the usual banter replaced by an unspoken agreement to pretend the night hadn't gone sour. When they finally parted ways, Ethan and Josh headed toward their neighborhood, the streetlights casting long, wavering shadows on the sidewalk. That's when they heard it, the low rumble of an engine. An old Ford Explorer, its paint chipped and rusted, swung into a clumsy three-point turn at the end of the block. Ethan's stomach twisted. "It's him!" Josh hissed, his eyes wide. The SUV crept closer, its headlights slicing through the darkness like knives. The boys quickened their pace, their sneakers slapping against the pavement. The vehicle matched their speed, hovering just behind them, until it pulled alongside. The driver's window rolled down, and there he was. Bob, his face half lit by the glow of the dashboard. "Need a ride, boys?" he called, his tone unnervingly casual. "Not safe for kids to be out this late." Ethan's mouth went dry. "No thing," he managed, his voice barely audible. Bob's smile widened, predatory. "Come on now, don't be stupid." The boys broke into a jog, their breaths ragged, their hearts hammering. The SUV idled for a moment before peeling off, its taillights vanishing into the night. Ethan and Josh didn't stop running until they reached the intersection where their paths diverged. They exchanged a quick, wordless nod before sprinting to their respective homes. Ethan's house was dark when he arrived, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. His dad was asleep, exhausted from a double shift, and his mom and sister were out, leaving the house eerily still. Ethan's hands trembled as he fumbled for the spare key hidden in the backyard shed. The night air was thick with the scent of damp grass and pine, and every rustle of leaves made his pulse spike. He retrieved the key and hurried to the back door, his fingers clumsy as he worked the lock. Just as the door swung open, he heard it, a faint crunch of footsteps on the gravel behind him. Before he could react, a hand clamped over his mouth, an arm snaking around his neck. Ethan's scream was muffled as he was shoved inside, the door slamming shut behind him. The intruder's grip was iron, their breath hot against his ear. Ethan thrashed, his nails digging into the man's hand, his mind racing with images of Bob's leering face. He managed to wrench his mouth free just enough to scream, "Dad!" The word tore from his throat, raw and desperate. He screamed again, and again, each cry a plea for survival. The man's grip faltered, and Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. He clawed and kicked, his small frame fueled by terror, until the intruder finally released him, bolting out the back door into the night. Ethan didn't look back. He stumbled up the stairs, his vision blurred with tears, screaming for his dad. His father burst from his room, bleary-eyed but alert, and after a frantic explanation, he searched the property, flashlight in hand. The backyard was empty, the night silent except for the distant wail of a siren. Ethan recounted everything: the bowling alley, Bob's unsettling behavior, the SUV, the attack. His dad's face darkened as he listened, his jaw tight with a mix of fear and fury. He filed a police report that night, but the bowling alley refused to release their surveillance footage, citing privacy concerns. Ethan's mom, horrified when she learned what happened, banned him from ever returning to Starlight. Years later, Ethan still couldn't shake the memory of that night. The police never found Bob, if that was even his name, and the alley closed down not long after, its neon sign dark and lifeless. Ethan couldn't say with absolute certainty that the man who attacked him was the same one from the bowling alley, but the coincidence was too stark to ignore. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, he'd lie awake, wondering if Bob was still out there, watching from the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike. Story 2: The Basement of Secrets. The summer of 2004 was a restless one for 16-year-old Tyler and his crew of misfits: Chip, Jason, Rowan, and Anish. Growing up in the sprawling suburbs of northern New Jersey, they were the kind of kids who thrived on chaos, chasing thrills to escape the suffocating boredom of their cul-de-sac lives. They called themselves the Night Prowlers, a tongue-in-cheek nod to their late-night escapades, which ranged from sneaking into abandoned warehouses to spray painting cryptic messages on overpass walls. Trouble was their currency, and they spent it freely. Their latest obsession was the Starlight Bowling Alley, a faded relic a few towns over that had seen better days. Rowan, the group's resident job hopper, had recently landed a gig there as a night attendant, a position that came with a set of keys and a dangerous amount of trust. Anish, the silver-tongued instigator of the group, saw an opportunity. "Imagine it," he'd said one night, his eyes glinting with mischief as they passed a bottle of cheap vodka around a bonfire. "An entire bowling alley to ourselves. No rules, no cops, just us." The idea was reckless, even by their standards. But Anish's charisma was a force of nature. By the end of the night, they were all in. The plan was set for 3 a.m., when the world was asleep and the alley was a ghost town. Jason, the designated driver and the only one who refused to drink, pulled up in his dad's sleek BMW, the engine purring like a caged animal. Tyler, already buzzed from the vodka, climbed into the back seat with Chip and Rowan, the air thick with the scent of alcohol and anticipation. Chip, ever the worrier, muttered warnings about getting caught, his high-pitched voice cutting through the haze of their excitement. Rowan just laughed, dangling the keys like a trophy. "Relax, man. I've got this." The bowling alley loomed in the darkness, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. Rowan unlocked the side door, and the group slipped inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The air was stale, heavy with the ghosts of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. The lanes stretched out before them, their polished surfaces gleaming under the dim emergency lights. For a moment, they stood in awe, the silence amplifying the thrill of their trespass. Then Tyler, emboldened by the alcohol, suggested they treat the lanes like a giant slip and slide. The others roared with approval, and soon they were sliding across the slick wood, their laughter bouncing off the walls. But the fun didn't last. The novelty wore off, and the group grew restless, their drunken energy craving a new outlet. Rowan mentioned a storage room in the employee-only area, a place he'd only seen once during his orientation. Intrigued, they followed him through a maze of narrow hallways, the air growing colder and mustier with each step. The storage room was a cluttered mess. Cardboard boxes, broken bowling pins, and dusty equipment stacked haphazardly against the walls. They poked around, flipping over crates and tossing aside old score sheets, their laughter tinged with the reckless abandon of youth. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant thud from somewhere below. The group froze, their breaths catching in their throats. "What the hell was that?" Chip whispered, his eyes wide with panic. Jason, the only sober one, scanned the room, his expression unreadable. "Is there a basement here?" he asked Rowan, who looked as confused as the rest of them. I don't think so," Rowan stammered, his bravado crumbling. Anish, ever the thrill-seeker, grinned. "Only one way to find out." They searched the room, their movements frantic until Jason's foot caught on the edge of a rug in the corner. He lifted it, revealing a wooden hatch set into the floor, its edges worn and splintered. The group stared at it, the air thick with unspoken dread. The thud they'd heard hadn't been random. It had come from below, from whatever lay beyond that hatch. Chip shook his head, his voice trembling. "We need to leave. Now!" But Jason, calm and resolute, ignored him. He knelt beside the hatch, his fingers tracing the rusted handle. "We came to explore," he said, his tone steady. "So let's explore." Before anyone could protest, Jason yanked the hatch open, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was damp and sour, like the breath of something ancient and forgotten. Chip backed away, muttering about getting Rowan fired, but the others were caught in the pull of curiosity and bravado. Jason went first, his phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. Tyler, his judgment clouded by alcohol, followed, with Anish and Rowan close behind. Chip stayed behind, his silhouette framed in the doorway above. The basement was a labyrinth of shadows, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. Cardboard boxes were stacked to the ceiling, their contents spilling out like the entrails of some forgotten era. The group moved cautiously, their flashlights casting jittery beams across the walls. Tyler's heart pounded, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through him. They were in over their heads and he knew it, but there was no turning back now. Anish spotted a door in the far corner, its paint peeling like flayed skin. Jason approached it, his hand hovering over the handle. Before he could open it, another thud echoed through the basement, this one closer, more deliberate. The group froze, their breaths hitching. "That wasn't an animal," Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't hesitate. He cracked the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was small, cluttered with more boxes and debris. But in the corner, illuminated by the faint glow of their flashlights, was a figure, a man, sitting cross-legged on the floor, his back to them. His hair was a tangled mess, his clothes tattered and filthy. The group stood paralyzed, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. For a long, agonizing minute, no one moved. Then the man slammed his head against the wall, the sound sharp and sickening. Tyler's stomach lurched. That was the noise they'd heard. "We need to go," Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. He took a step back, his eyes locked on the figure. The others turned to follow, their movements slow and deliberate, as if any sudden noise might shatter the fragile silence. But Rowan, clumsy in his panic, tripped over a piece of debris, cursing loudly. The man in the corner let out a guttural yell, and chaos erupted. Tyler and Jason scrambled for the ladder, their flashlights bouncing wildly. Anish was right behind them, his breath ragged. Chip, still at the hatch, shouted down, his voice shrill with fear. Rowan was the last to reach the ladder, but before he could climb, the man lunged, tackling him to the ground. Rowan screamed, his voice raw with terror, as the man clawed at his back. Tyler froze, torn between flight and loyalty. Then Chip, in a moment of unexpected bravery, grabbed a metal pipe from the storage room and hurled it down the hatch. The pipe struck the man with a sickening thud, followed by a scream that was more animal than human. Rowan scrambled up the ladder, his face pale and streaked with sweat. Chip yanked him to safety and slammed the hatch shut, the sound reverberating through the room. The group didn't stop to catch their breath. They sprinted through the bowling alley, their footsteps pounding against the linoleum, impaled into Jason's BMW. Rowan fumbled with the keys, locking the door with shaking hands as they peeled out of the parking lot. The drive back was silent, the weight of what they'd seen pressing down on them. Rowan, still trembling, recounted the attack in halting whispers. The man's face, he said, was a nightmare. Gaunt, filthy, with wild eyes and a tangled beard that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He'd only seen it for a split second, but it was enough to haunt him. The group never spoke of that night again, and Rowan quit his job the next day, refusing to give his boss an explanation. The bowling alley closed a few months later, its windows boarded up, its lanes left to gather dust. Tyler never bowled again. The memory of that basement, of the man in the corner, lingered like a stain on his soul. He often wondered how the man had gotten down there, whether there was another entrance they'd missed, or if Rowan's boss had known more than he let on. The hatch had been hidden for a reason, and that knowledge gnawed at Tyler, a reminder that some secrets are better left buried. Story 3. The Man in the Attic. The summer of 2023 was supposed to be a fresh start for Matt and his girlfriend Rebecca. After a tumultuous year marked by job changes and family drama, they'd moved into a quaint two-story house in a quiet Philadelphia suburb, hoping to build a life together. The house was old with creaky floors and a faint, musty smell, but it had charm. A wraparound porch, stained glass windows, and a sprawling backyard that caught the golden light of late summer evenings. Matt loved it, and Rebecca, though less enthusiastic about the fixer-upper vibe, was willing to give it a chance. One humid August night, they decided to shake off the monotony with a spontaneous date. "Let's go bowling," Rebecca suggested, a playful glint in her eye. Matt, surprised but game, agreed. They drove to Lucky Strikes, a nearby bowling alley that doubled as a bar, its neon sign buzzing against the twilight. The place was packed, the air thick with the clatter of pins and the hum of conversation. They rented shoes, picked out balls, and settled into a lane, laughing at their mutual lack of skill. Rebecca's throws veered into the gutters with alarming consistency, while Matt managed a few spares, though he was hardly a pro. They teased each other mercilessly, the tension of the past few months melting away. But the night took a turn when Rebecca's ex-boyfriend Derek strolled in with a group of loud, boisterous friends. Matt noticed him first, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a cocky grin, his laughter cutting through the din of the alley. Rebecca's face fell, her shoulders hunching as she turned away, pretending to focus on her next throw. "That's him," she whispered, her voice tight. "We need to go." Matt didn't argue. They packed up, returned their shoes, and slipped out, Rebecca's unease palpable. Matt caught Derek's eye as he handed back the shoes, a fleeting moment of recognition that left him unsettled, though he didn't tell Rebecca. Back home, they decided to salvage the night with a makeshift bowling tournament on their ancient Wii console. Matt opened a bottle of Merlot, and they played in the living room, the TV casting a soft glow across the furniture. With music playing and wine flowing, the mood lifted, the bowling alley fading into a distant memory. Rebecca, a lightweight, was tipsy after her second glass, her laughter bright and unguarded. Matt felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet gratitude for these moments of normalcy. Then the music stopped, the playlist cycling to its end, and in the sudden silence they heard it, a heavy thud from upstairs, like a piece of furniture toppling over. Matt and Rebecca froze, their eyes locking. "You heard that, right?" Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. Matt nodded, his pulse quickening. He turned off the TV, plunging the room into silence, but the house was still, the air thick with anticipation. "Probably just something falling," he said, though he didn't believe it. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs, Rebecca trailing behind, her hand clutching his arm. The upstairs hallway was dark, the air cooler than it should have been. Matt checked every room, his flashlight beam sweeping across beds and closets, but found nothing. No fallen books, no toppled lamps, no sign of what had caused the noise. He forced a smile for Rebecca's sake, but his mind was racing. The house was old, strange sounds weren't uncommon. Still, the weight of that thud lingered, a puzzle he couldn't solve. They returned to the living room, resuming their game, though the playful mood was gone. After another half hour, they carried their wine upstairs to the bedroom, exhaustion overtaking them. Rebecca fell asleep quickly, her breathing soft and steady, but Matt lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house felt alive, its creaks and groans amplified in the stillness. Then it came again. Another thud, heavier this time, unmistakable. Matt's heart lurched. The sound had come from above, but they were already on the second floor. The only thing above them was the attic. The attic door was in the hallway, a pull-down panel with a flimsy metal ladder. Matt slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Rebecca, and stood beneath it, listening. Every few seconds, there was a faint creak, rhythmic, like the shifting of weight. His mind raced. Could it be an animal? A raccoon, maybe? Or a squirrel? He'd heard stories of critters nesting in attics, but the sounds were too deliberate, too human. He grabbed a broom from the closet, its wooden handle a poor substitute for a weapon, and pulled the attic door open. The ladder descended with a groan, the darkness above swallowing the light. Matt climbed slowly, his phone's flashlight trembling in his hand. At the top, he paused, his breath shallow, and listened. The creaking was louder now, unmistakable. It was the old wooden rocking chair they'd stored up there, a family heirloom too bulky for the main house. He raised his phone, the beam cutting through the gloom, and saw it. The chair rocking gently, and in it, a man. Matt's blood ran cold. The man was hunched, his clothes tattered, his hair a wild tangle that obscured his face. He rocked slowly, deliberately, as if unaware of Matt's presence. Matt's voice caught in his throat, but he forced the words out. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The rocking stopped. The man turned, his face illuminated by the flashlight. A gaunt, hollow-cheeked visage, his eyes wild and unfocused. He let out a guttural, animalistic growl, a sound that seemed to claw its way from some primal depths. Then he stood, his movements jerky, and Matt's nerve broke. He scrambled down the ladder, nearly falling, and shoved the door shut, screaming for Rebecca to call the police. She jolted awake, fumbling for her phone, her voice shaking as she dialed 911. Matt braced himself against the attic door, his arms burning as the man above pounded on it, each blow rattling the frame. The kicks stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling sound. Laughter, high-pitched and unhinged, interspersed with muttered words in what sounded like Russian. Matt's mind raced, piecing together the impossible. This man had been in their home, hiding, watching, for who knew how long. The thought made his skin crawl. When the police arrived, Rebecca let them in, her face pale with terror. Matt held the attic door until the officers took over, their flashlights and drawn weapons a stark contrast to his broom. They climbed into the attic, their voices muffled but tense, and after a brief struggle, they emerged with the man in handcuffs. As they led him through the living room, his eyes locked onto Matt's, a gaze filled with a twisted mix of hatred, confusion, and something almost pitiable. His lips twisted into a grotesque sneer, his face a mask of madness. The police later confirmed the man was likely homeless, possibly suffering from severe mental illness. He likely entered through an open window in the backyard, drawn to the house by chance or opportunity. They found no evidence he'd been there long, no belongings, no signs of habitation. But the rocking chair had been moved to the center of the attic, as if he'd claimed it as his own. Matt and Rebecca didn't press charges, too shaken to pursue the matter, but the police assured them the man would face criminal charges or be committed for evaluation. The house never felt the same after that. Matt and Rebecca moved out a few months later, unable to shake the memory of those creaks, that laughter, that face. They never bowled again, the sport forever tainted by the night that led them to the man in the attic. Sometimes, in the quiet of a new home, Matt would lie awake, listening for sounds that weren't there, wondering if the man had chosen their house by chance, or if something darker had drawn him to them.